Good afternoon, class. It is April 1st, which is Wednesday. We're over halfway through through this week's lessons. I hope you're finding the information you need and you are doing the sections like I've asked you to. Remember, these packets are for a grade, so please do them. So yesterday we left off on a really weakened America. These past liberal and Republican presidents did a lot to really hurt the basically respect of the nation in the eyes of other countries. And so we're going to be learning about some presidents that return us to basically being a country worth looking up to. But before that, in your packet, you have a quiz 30 for your 6th grade history class. I'd like you to work on that now. It's going to be part of the packet grade, so please do your best on it. The information, of course, is in your book. And I know on the back, there is a map with states and capitals, and I know you don't have that in the packet. If you have an opportunity to look up a states and capitals map, you can. It's not required for you to do. I made these were printed out before all this had happened, so you can't do the back side. I completely understand. Just mainly do the parts that you can do. But with that in mind, let's continue. We're on page 255, which is 14.3. We're learning about Ronald Reagan today. Americans approached the presidential election of 1980 realizing that something had to be done to restore America's image at home and abroad. The hostages were still being held in Iran that Jimmy Carter had refused to return, and communism was making gains throughout the world, especially in Latin America. In our country, heavy taxes and expensive social programs had created serious economic problems. The Republican Party nominated Ronald Reagan, former governor of California, as their candidate for president to oppose Jimmy Carter. Imagine that, a Republican governor of California. I doubt that would ever happen again. Ronald Reagan told the people that he wanted to return America to her traditional Christian values and to end the killing of unborn children. He emphasized the need for America to rebuild its defenses and to take a strong stand against communism in the world. He said that he wanted to revive America's strength, dignity, and pride because America was meant to be a city on a hill, quoting from the Bible, putting forth the beacon of liberty for all the world to see. Because of his effective speaking ability, Reagan became known as the great communicator, and he learned his skill mainly from his previous jobs. Governors, of course, have to learn how to speak to people, but he was also a movie actor. He played in many roles, so words came naturally to Ronald Reagan. In the 1980 presidential election, large numbers of Bible-believing Christians became actively involved in the political process. They did this by educating people on the issues, by encouraging people to vote, and by taking responsibility to vote themselves. They realized that Ronald Reagan represented a return to traditional and family values. Ronald Reagan, the first president since Dwight Eisenhower to serve 2 four-year terms, was elected by a landslide in 1980. On March 30th, 1981, just 2 months after his inauguration, President Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. while walking from a Washington hotel to his car. After being rushed to surgery, Reagan made a rapid recovery and was soon back at work in the White House. Reagan was able to make long-range plans that put America on a more stable and conservative course. The attempt to return America to the traditional values of church, family, and free enterprise became known as the Reagan Revolution. The president's first confrontation with liberal values was his attempt to cut government welfare spending and restore the ability of the family to make its own financial decisions. Although he was forced to compromise with the politicians who controlled Congress, the president succeeded in cutting taxes, which spurred American job growth and productivity while bringing down inflation. This cutting of taxes was very important. When individuals are taxed too much, they cannot buy the things they need for themselves and their families. Thus, businesses cannot sell the things they make. When businesses cannot sell their goods and have to pay heavy taxes, they must charge higher prices for their goods. And they must also lay people off their jobs. Lower taxes help all Americans. President Reagan restored the strength of the U.S. military, enabling the nation to exercise peace through strength. He believed in stopping communism before it could attack and enslave a country, an idea which became known as the Reagan Doctrine. In 1983, President Reagan proved he would take military action against communism. Cuba's dictator, Fidel Castro, planned to invade the island nation of Grenada and use it as a military base to invade the mainland of South America. To prevent a full-scale communist invasion, President Reagan welcomed the American soldiers to go to Grenada. The Grenadans, of course, welcomed the American soldiers with happiness. With the help of armed forces from neighboring islands, the Americans quickly rounded up the advance guard of Cubans and shipped them back to Cuba. Notice they didn't kill them. No bloodshed involved, just sent them right back to Cuba. Ronald Reagan appointed 3 U.S. Supreme Court justices who began to interpret the Constitution of the United States back to the traditional values of the Founding Fathers. Among these was Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman justice ever appointed to the High Court. In 1981, NASA launched the first space shuttle, the Columbia. The shuttle was a reusable space plane that could carry satellites and other cargo, as well as astronauts into space and then return to Earth. This program thrived until 1986, when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after launching from Cape Canaveral, Florida. All 7 crew members were killed, and even a teacher on board had met her fate that day. The explosion of the Challenger shocked the nation and slowed down the space program for several years. As America strengthened its defenses and increased its research in new space-age technology, the Soviet leaders knew they did not have the resources to keep up. Communism is a very inefficient economic system, which gives its workers little incentive to work hard or become more skillful because they earn the same no matter how hard they work. The Soviet Union spent so much time and money building weapons that it had little left to provide basic food, shelter, and clothing for its citizens. The Soviet government also paid terrorist groups and armies throughout the world to attempt to overthrow free governments while their own people remained poor. By 1985, the Soviet Union was in deep economic trouble. The enslaved people of the Soviet Union began to show their dissatisfaction with the communist system. The evil empire, as Ronald Reagan called it, was collapsing economically because of the weakness of its own communist system, and because America, under Reagan, had stood up to communist aggression. In 1987, President Reagan visited the city of Western Berlin and challenged the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall. And I mean, he was adamant in his speech. "Tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev," he pounded. And with his great booming voice, it was a powerful scene captured on television cameras around the world. The communists had constructed the wall in 1961 to separate free West Berlin from communist East Berlin. Gorbachev was alarmed by the U.S. military's progress in developing laser weaponry. He was especially alarmed by the program known as the Strategic Defensive Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars, not the movies. A system of space-age weaponry designed to destroy enemy missile warheads in flight. So what it would do is it would shoot a very high-beam laser, detecting a warhead, and basically like it would guide the missile. So from hundreds of miles, that missile's coming, that laser pinpoints it, we send a missile, and it intercepts. It was a great system, and it kept many countries from attacking us. President Reagan had equipped the American military with technological marvels that the poverty-stricken Soviet economy could simply not afford to build. Desperate to save the Soviet Union from complete collapse, Mikhail Gorbachev agreed to reduce Soviet weapons strength, to free the enslaved nations of Eastern Europe, and to stop encouraging revolution and bloodshed throughout the world. In return, the United States and other free nations promised to help the Soviet Union rebuild its economy and government based on a democratic, free enterprise system. The Soviets called the plan perestroika, which means restructuring. Once Gorbachev's reforms began to take place, the communists lost control of Eastern Europe, one country after another. The dominoes began to fall, and all of these communist-held countries eventually became their own independent countries again. The communists lost control of Eastern Europe, and communist leaders in Moscow, they managed to keep things under control in the Russian Republic until 1991, when the power of the Soviet Communist Party finally collapsed. The Soviet Union was no more. They were free finally from the shackles of Russia, though Russia has been slowly trying to rebuild those shackles again during modern times. The presidency of Ronald Reagan set in motion a chain of historic events. Reagan's strengthening of American defenses aided the collapse of the Soviet economy, and his support of private enterprise caused an economic boom that weakened communism's appeal around the world. So make sure you are doing comp check 14C today, even only, so number 2 and 4. All right, guys, make sure you do your work, and I will see you Thursday.